FA fam, welcome back in. We are on to week 6 already. We have our top 24 running back rankings ready for you to dive into. So, without wasting any more time, Kev, let's just jump into our RB1s for week 6. They are as follows. We have Christian McCaffrey at the top, followed by Tony Pollard, Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, Travis Etienne, Kyron Williams, Raheem Mostert, Alvin Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Kenneth Walker, Josh Jacobs, and David Montgomery rounding out the top 12. Kev, RB1s, who should the folks know about or be excited about in week 6?
Yeah, I think we start off with Tony Pollard, and Tony Pollard hasn't been great the last couple of weeks, but on the season he's averaging 16.6 fantasy points per game, but he has a 21.2 expected fantasy points per game. He is still first in red zone touches, and game script has really played a large part in some of his usage. Obviously, last week it's the 49ers. They got absolutely steamrolled in that game, but he's still fourth in weighted opportunities despite having sub double digit performances each of the last 2 weeks against the Jets and the 49ers, respectively. Now, this is a much better matchup and one he should definitely bounce back from. The Chargers have allowed the 12th most rushing yards, the 5th most receiving yards allowed, and the 8th most fantasy points to running back. So this is a elite spot for Tony Pollard. I expect a big bounce back spot for him this week after a couple dud performances. I did want to mention Saquon and Austin Eckler. Both should be returning this week from injuries, which is a welcome sight considering the state of the running back position right now. But next up, let's talk about Kyron Williams. They face the Arizona Cardinals this week. The elite usage continues for Kyron Williams. Week 4, he played 85% of the snaps, 92% of the RB rush attempts, and 76% of the routes. One thing that did concern me a little bit was only a 6% target share. That is going to worry me a little bit with Cooper Kupp coming back. If he's going to start seeing less opportunity in the passing game, that is going to be a problem. But because he hasn't really been terribly efficient as a runner either, 3.8 yards per carry, he is 40th in breakaway run rate, but 19th in yards created per touch. Now, this week, they do get a good matchup this week against the Cardinals. They've allowed the 10th most rushing yards, the 9th most rushing touchdowns, and the 4th most fantasy points to running back. So this is a good bounce back spot for Kyron Williams this week. But I am somewhat concerned over the long haul if he's not going to see as many opportunities in the passing game. But next up, let's talk about Raheem Mostert. Now he is back again as the lead back because right now Devon Achane could go to IR. He hasn't yet as of recording this, but that's been kind of the talk. He's going to get a second opinion on his knee. It's kind of weird because it kind of came out of nowhere. There's a little bit of talk, Sunday night. We kind of talked about it a little bit on the waiver show, but it really wasn't widely reported. And then Monday, it kind of started to spread a little bit more. So regardless, I don't think he plays this week, whether he gets placed on IR, whether he does or he doesn't. But this week, Raheem Mostert has an elite matchup versus Carolina. Right now, Raheem Mostert in his own right has been really good. He's 18th in weighted opportunities, 20th in target share, but he's 11th in red zone touches. He is 12th in yards created per touch, 5th in breakaway run rate, 2nd in evaded tackles, and 9th in yards per route run. He's also 4th in fantasy points per game. Jeff Wilson could return this week from IR, but they still also have Salvon Ahmed as well as another option there at running back. But I do expect Raheem Mostert to lead this backfield. Next up, let's talk about Alvin Kamara. They get Houston this week. Since returning from suspension, he's handled 68% of the snaps, 58% of the rush attempts, 53% of the routes with a whopping 24% target share. Now, some of that is baked in because it's only 2 games. And in the week 1, they saw like 14 targets against the Patriots. But still, he's averaging 20 fantasy points per game, 25th in yards created per touch, and 18th in yards per route run. It's not as efficient so far as he was last year, but it's only 2 games. And then Houston, they've allowed the 13th most rushing yards, the 6th most touchdowns, and the 10th most PPR points to running back. So this is another good spot for Alvin Kamara, so you can start him with confidence. Kenneth Walker versus Cincinnati this week. He is 14th in weighted opportunities, 8.2% target share, but a 30.2% route participation, which is 47th among all running backs. Not good. 18.4 fantasy points per game. This is kind of what we were expecting for Kenneth Walker a little bit here, that we were going to start to see Charbonnet kind of eat into this workload a little bit, and that's what he started to do, mainly in the receiving. Although saying that, I will still say Kenneth Walker has still been real incredibly efficient as a runner. 6th in breakaway run rate, 21st in yards created per touch, 1st in evaded tackles, and 4th in yards per route run. But in week 4, Walker handled 72% of the RB rush attempts, but a 0% target share, while Charbonnet played 25% of the snaps, but saw a 9% target share within this offense. This is starting to look like a little more of a situation where you can see Kenneth Walker handle the 2-minute drive and the long down and distance stuff and the passing game work here, where Kenneth Walker is just going to be like a first and second down banger. So that is concerning, but they do get a decent matchup this week against Cincinnati. They've allowed the 5th most rushing yards per game at 107.2 a clip, but they've also only allowed 16th most fantasy points to running back. So that is something to monitor. I don't think it's a terrible matchup for Kenneth Walker, but if he's going to continue to lose pass catching work, it's going to make him touchdown dependent on most weeks. So that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, man, you love to see a lot of these top running backs in really good spots this week. I feel like the past couple of weeks there's been, like maybe your top five you feel really good about, but if you have, any of these top 12 running backs, they're all in incredible spots, and I'm with you. I'm calling the Tony Pollard 30-point game incoming. So let's go ahead and move on to our RB2s for week two. Kicking it off at number 13 is Isaiah Pacheco, followed by Derrick Henry, James Cook, Joe Mixon, Brees Hall, DeAndre Swift, Alexander Madison, Brian Robinson, Zach Moss, Ramondre Stevenson, Roshan Johnson, and Jonathan Taylor at RB24. Kev, same thing, RB2s. Who should the folks know about?
Let's start off with Isaiah Pacheco in here as an RB1. It just was hard for me to get him to that point, so I got him as close as I possibly could. I have him at RB13. Last week, he played 60% of the snaps, 60% of the rush attempts, and 40% of the routes with a 9% target share. On the season, he's 20th in weighted opportunities, and he's also 6th in red zone touches. He's been really efficient as well. 7th in yards created per touch, 6th in breakaway run rate, 19th in evaded tackles, and 3rd in yard per route run. Isaiah Pacheco has been really good so far to start the season. Another decent performance from last week against the Vikings. This week, they get the nut matchup you can get as a running back. The Broncos have allowed the most rushing yards, they've allowed the most fantasy points, and they've allowed the most touchdowns. And it's not even close, as a matter of fact. In terms of fantasy points per game, they've allowed 44.1 fantasy points per game. The next closest is 31.1. And they've also allowed 12 total touchdowns so far, and we're only through 5 weeks of the season. This defense, they've been so incredibly bad against running backs. So this is one of the best matchups you pop for running backs, and Isaiah Pacheco has it. So next up, let's move over to James Cook. Another really good matchup for him against the Giants. On the season, James Cook is RB15. He's been good, not great. Usually still there for the most part. 60% of the snaps, 51% of the rush attempts, but 63% of the routes. He is 11th in true yards per carry, but only 34th in yards created per touch. But he's also 13th in weighted opportunities with a 11% target share. He's also 12th in route participation and 8th in yards per route run, which is exactly what you want to see. Like I said, this is a really good matchup against the Giants, who allow the 2nd most rushing yards, the 3rd most rushing touchdowns, and the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. James Cook, while he has been losing some opportunities, especially on the goal line, like guys like Damian Harris and Latavius Murray, James Cook is still handling enough work to really be a solid RB2. I don't think he's in that RB1 discussion at all, but he's definitely a solid week-to-week option, especially in PPR formats because of his pass-catching upside that he brings. And so I do think James Cook is entrenched, and this is a really good matchup against the Giants. Next up, let's talk about Derrick Henry, who I don't know if we're seeing the signs of decline or now using him a little bit differently, because he's still seeing a 70% opportunity share. But one thing to note, Titans are 19th in run play per game. That is going to majorly affect Derrick Henry. He is seeing a 7.8% target share, but he's only 18th in red zone touches. And that, for a player who doesn't see a ton of opportunity in the passing game, that is a problem because he's 50th in routes run on the season. Now, he's also 43rd in fantasy points per opportunity. He's 18th in fantasy points per game. He hasn't been incredibly bad. He's still 16th in yards created per touch, but he's 39th in true yards per carry. Right now, he's pretty much game script dependent. If the Titans fall behind, we will see a Derrick Henry phase out of the game plan in favor of Tyjae Spears, who I have to admit has shown way more juice than what Derrick Henry has at this point. I don't think you should be looking to move on from Derrick Henry or trade him right away because his fantasy playoff schedule is beautiful. It is the best in the league. This week against the Ravens is kind of one of those matchups. The Ravens are really good against the run. They've allowed 0 rushing touchdowns on the season, 11th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. So this is a tougher matchup. And if Baltimore can build any sort of lead, you're going to see Derrick Henry get set again. So while Derrick Henry is always capable of ripping off a long run and scoring a touchdown, but I am somewhat concerned with the usage and how they're utilizing Derrick Henry moving forward. And then Brees Hall, after coming off the monster performance against the Broncos, he's going to fall back to earth this week a little bit. And when you face the Philadelphia Eagles, who have been incredible against the run. But it was good to see last week for Brees Hall. 52% snap share last week for him, but 76% of the rush attempts, only 30% of the routes run, but he did see a 12% target share. Despite coming back from an ACL injury, I mean, he has been really efficient. Really hasn't saw any decline in terms of any efficiency numbers. 12th in true yards per carry, 21st in yards per route run, 4th in breakaway run rate, and 20th in yards created per touch. Now, one thing that I hope to see we change is only one red zone touch is going to be an issue. He needs to be well more involved there. But it was a step in the right direction from what he was able to do last week after ripping off that long touchdown. But like I said, Philadelphia have allowed the third fewest rushing yards, the fifth fewest touchdowns, and the third fewest fantasy points to running backs. While Brees Hall is more than capable of ripping off a long touchdown anytime he touches the ball, still, this is really a bad matchup against Philadelphia. So I would temper expectations this week against this Eagles defense. Lastly, let's hit on Alexander Madison really quickly. Now, they play Chicago this week. Madison last week started to see a little bit drop in opportunity. 53% of the snaps, 47% of the rush attempts, 42% of the routes, but only 7% of the targets, where Akers handled 28% of the snaps, 26% of the rush attempts, 16% of the routes, but saw an 8% target share. Madison has been fine this year. He's been the quintessential math running back so far, 11.8 fantasy points per game, but he's with a 19.6 expected fantasy points per game. So he's really underwhelmed in terms of that department. He's 35th in yards created per touch, 36th in breakaway run rate, and 15th in evaded tackles. Now, this is a good matchup on paper, but I will say this. You really aren't able to run the ball against Chicago effectively. They have allowed the 12th fewest rushing yards, but they've allowed the ninth most rushing touchdowns. But really, where you beat them is through the air because they have allowed the most receiving yards and the most receiving touchdowns to running backs on the season. So Alexander Madison, I'm a little bit worried about if they can utilize him a little bit more in the passing game. That I think that he can be fine this week, but this isn't the best matchup. I know we see the Bears and we think, oh, they're terrible at everything, but they've actually been low key pretty decent against the run so far. So that's why we have Alexander Madison where he does. And then lastly, Ramondre Stevenson has a really good spot this week against the Raiders. However, Stevenson and the Patriots have been dreadful this season, so I don't know how well I feel about it, but this is a good matchup for Ramondre Stevenson. And then JT still being ramped up. He played 16% of the snaps, 18% of the rush attempts. Should continue to ramp up, likely another week or two from really taking over his backfield completely. But I think in the meantime, I think Zach Moss is still a fine play. So
Yeah, the only thing I'll throw in here with the RB2s is Joe Mixon. We both have him ranked at 16th, and frankly, that could be too high. I mean, Mixon has just not been good whatsoever. I mean, you're talking about someone who is fourth in opportunity share among running backs, 27th in expected fantasy points per game, 29th in true yards per carry, 33rd in yards per touch. He has just been really, really inefficient despite seeing all the volume. I wish I could have him higher. I was, as the season grew closer, I was growing higher and higher on him. I think I ended up before the season, I had him at like RB8 or RB9 or something like that. But he has just not been good. But when you have a running back like this, seeing this much volume, he's still going to be in that like RB2 range. He only has one finish so far this season in the top 15 in half PPR scoring, and that was RB15. So just want to throw him out there. Kev, is there anybody outside of the top 24 or any other running backs that you think the folks should know about before we wrap it up?
yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of guys, right? We have to talk about the Chicago situation right now.
Yeah.
Khalil Herbert is likely not going to play. He's going to be out multiple weeks. We'll see if they're going to put him on IR. They have yet to do so, but that could change at any time. So I think that opens the door for Roschon Johnson and then Deonta Foreman. Now, Roschon Johnson obviously suffered the concussion last week, but that was Thursday, and there's already been some reports that they expect him to be ready to go this week. He should be able to clear the protocol. So against Minnesota this week. So he is likely going to be the beneficiary from this. He has looked incredible in short sample sizes so far. I definitely think he's the running back to own, obviously. And I think he's a low end RB2 this week or a high end RB3 flex option for most people. Now, Deonta Foreman, I think is fine if you had to play him because he's going to mix in. He's going to get opportunity. But I think this is still Roschon Johnson's opportunity to lose. And then Jerome Ford, hate the matchup against San Francisco. I know a lot of people picked him up thinking that he could be an RB2, but this is just a dreadful matchup. And Deshaun Watson may not even play in this. So this could be an absolute beatdown against the San Francisco 49ers this week. And then Emery DeMarcado, we have to talk about him against the Rams. It's not a great matchup against the Rams defense, but I do expect for him to be the guy who's going to handle the majority of the work from this backfield. I know that today there was some discussion, and the people that don't even know who Emery DeMarcado is and all they've ever heard of is the name is Keontae Ingram, or trying to peddle Keontae Ingram's being the guy. Listen, Keontae Ingram's been in this offense for 2 years and has looked terrible every single time he's been given the opportunity. His efficiency, his usage numbers are dreadful. DeMarcado did more in one half of football than he's done his entire career here with the Cardinals. So I do think this is his backfield. He saw 4 targets as well. So I do think that he is a pretty decent flex option this week. And then lastly, Javonte Williams got a full practice in today, so he possibly could be back. I don't know how that's going to look. Obviously, Jaleel McLaughlin has actually looked good at both of the last 2 weeks. And then Samaje Perine looked good as well. So I don't know how this is going to work out. I think it could end up being a true on committee where it kind of factors all of them out. It is against Kansas City on the road. So I don't know if I really want to play any of them if I don't have to. And then Chuba Hubbard is the other one I want to talk about. I think he's a decent flex option as well against Miami. Miami has struggled to stop the run this year. So Chuba Hubbard could also be a name that you could take a look at as well. Other than that, that's kind of the guys I really want to talk about. I know people may ask why Rachaad White's not any higher. Dreadful matchup against the Lions. The Lions defense has been really good against the run this year. So I'm not really all that excited to play somebody who's already super inefficient anyway. So Rachaad White also is not in this range as well. So that being said, hope everybody likes the video. Please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We're only like 100 subs away, or roughly right around there from hitting 5K. So any support we can get, we'd greatly appreciate it. Let's try to get there by the end of the week. It'd be awesome. If not, we'll get there soon enough. Appreciate all the support. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Bye.